I think we've got more than half of the people who said they would be interested today present and involved already in the webinar. So I just want to say good afternoon, welcome on behalf of the Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and thank you for the interest that you have shown in what I consider a very important topic that is going to affect all of us from now onwards till the budget is announced. So I'll just go through a few key points that I thought I should mention before we start our discussion. First of all, I want to, most of you know Manu Bhaskaran from Centennial Asia Advisors. He's the founder and CEO of the company, and he's well known for all his comments on the economy, on the budget, and so on. So we are very pleased to have him. Thank you again, Manu, for being with us this year. So very quickly, what I want to say is that Singapore expects the GDP to rebound by 4% to 6% this year. This is how it stands at the moment. At the end of the year, we'll know if there's any change. The budget deficit, it is expected that it would be about 1.1 billion or 2.2% of GDP in the year that is going to end in March 2022 versus the last budget deficit, which was much higher at 64.9 billion or 13.9% of GDP. So this is in Sing dollars, what I've just said, but in US, it would be about 49.06. So there are three areas that I want to touch on before I open the floor for discussions. The first is green transition. Yeah. So the second one is healthcare, and the third one is taxes. But before I proceed, I would like to hear what Manu, sorry Manu for giving you the highlights for what you should talk about. Then later we can digress and go to other places. So hopefully we will touch green transition, healthcare, and taxes, and then I will add some points after you've said something, and we'll listen to what the others have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, George, and thanks to SICCI for inviting me to speak. Very good afternoon to all our friends out there. I'll try and keep this short because I think what we want to do in this is really to hear from you. But let me just, as George suggested, maybe give some background. I think the most important background is, of course, last Friday's speech by Minister Lawrence Wong, outlining the government's philosophy on fiscal management and so on, and how Singapore should respond to the challenges which I think George has rightly identified as inequality, aging, and climate change. Inequality, of course, raises the issue of taxation. If you read between the lines, and this is heroically reading between the lines of a minister who was very careful how he worded his speech, but my guess is that a GST increase will probably be announced quite soon, and it will probably be implemented sometime 2023. This was suggested in his speech where he said that they wanted to have the GST done between 2022 and 2025, but preferably sooner rather than later. So the hint I thought was very clear. And of course, the GST increase, when it is done, probably in 2023, it will be accompanied by substantial government offsets, GST vouchers, transfers to the lower income groups and so on, so as to make for a smooth adjustment to a higher tax rate. Second thing that he announced quite clearly is that the carbon price is too low. So picking up on George's point about the green transition, we need to raise the carbon price. It will be done so in stages starting next year until 2030. So that's going to happen. The third thing that Minister Wong looked at was to talk about the idea of taxes to correct for inequality, which he identified as a major problem. But if you look carefully at what he wrote, what he said, I think his argument was more that inequality should be addressed more through the government's measures like improving social mobility, investing in preschool education for kids, making it more widely available at subsidized prices, and improving the existing arrangements for support to the lower income groups, like the progressive wage model, and the workfare income supplement. So it didn't seem to me that a wealth tax was imminent, but he did talk about a wealth tax. And my feeling is that eventually there will be some kind of wealth tax, but it will be more like an enhanced property tax rather than the kind of wealth tax that you find or you used to find in continental Europe and so on. But it is quite clear that taxes of some kind will be brought in at some stage to address inequality. So that's the first set of things I thought I would raise for your consideration. The second is what's the government's working assumption about the economy? I think they are, if you look at what they have been doing of late, not just Minister Wong's speech, but the Monetary Authority of Singapore's recent policy tightening, which was announced the day before Minister Wong's speech, it looks like they believe that the pandemic situation will turn around. It's a question of time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be thinking of a GST increase, and MAS would certainly not have tightened policy, right? So they believe that the addressing the pandemic through providing additional help to the economy through job support schemes and other support measures will not be needed next year, right? Those expenditures will not be needed. That's their assumption, right? The third thing is that actually they seem relatively confident about the economic outlook for next year. Certainly, this quarter and the preceding quarter will show some weakness because of the Delta variant and the various restrictions the government had been forced to bring in. But if you look at what the Monetary Authority of Singapore has been saying and the data, it looks like global recovery, together with the gradual relaxation of restrictions within the domestic economy, will lead to a much stronger pickup in economic activity next year. That doesn't mean to say that they are ignoring the risk. They do identify the risks, such as the bottlenecks in the supply chain, which are quite troublesome right now, affecting semiconductors, shipping, containers, electric power generation in some countries, and so on. They also accept that higher oil prices will have some impact on slowing the global economy, and they have looked at the slower growth in the Chinese economy and considered its implications. But I think taking all these into consideration, they clearly seem to believe that it will be offset by the release of pent-up demand when all these restrictions on activities are removed and people go back to more normal spending routines, including on travel and tourism. The final point I'd make is that there is more and more evidence, at least anecdotal evidence, that property prices are moving up. HDB resale prices are at a new high, highest since I think 2013, and private home prices are also beginning to move up. We are not yet in some kind of speculative bubble, but there is a lot of liquidity out there, and even if the Fed starts to raise interest rates, basically rates are going to remain low. But particularly in Singapore, my sense, given MAS policy, is that local interest rates are going to go up by less than international interest rates. And that will continue to fuel the property market here. Now, why do I say this? Because I think at some point in time, the government will probably feel the need to send a signal to the market to cool it down a little bit, just in order to prevent some kind of speculative boom. So I think in terms of government policy, in terms of what will come out in the budget, we should also prepare for some kind of what they call macro-prudential moves, i.e., things like capital gains tax or additional buyer's stamp duty, things like that, or restrictions on the loan-to-value ratios that the banks use when they lend for mortgage. So I think those are the general broad points I wanted to make, and maybe I'll hand it back to George now for his comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. On the green transition, I actually have 2 points on top of what you have just said. And one is whether the green technologies that are acquired and deployed, what is the scope for R&D investment that will accelerate the transition to this green transition? Because you find that everybody is talking about it, but how soon can we have it in place is the question, and what needs to be done for that. Healthcare, given the current situation since last year, I think this is going to require a lot of additional GDP in spending over the next 10 years. That's the projection. Not to mention the investments to reduce emissions, to provide quality education, and to maintain security. So I think we need to look at how the budget is going to address rising healthcare costs arising out of COVID-19. As far as taxes are concerned, a few points that I have to make. They're looking into increasing the goods and services tax, as you have mentioned correctly, and it looks like it's going to happen. But what is going to be the impact on not just the ordinary people, but also on the SMEs is something that we also have to consider, because the SMEs have been very badly hit in the last 1.5 years, almost 2 years now. A lot of small businesses are going out of business, and those who have been self-reliant in running little businesses are also closing shops. So what's going to happen to them? What can be done for them? So I think taxes again is something that we have to look at. And then the taxes that we get from tourism and so on, this has again been curtailed because of COVID activities. So what are the suggestions that we can give in order to enhance the possibility of the economy picking up again and getting the people who were left on the shelves back in action again? We can request that a lot of the hikes can be delayed further if possible, but I think we have to justify why it has to be done, because the government has also been dishing out a lot of money. And the GST implementation will definitely affect consumption. This again goes back to not so much the big businesses, but the smaller businesses that are involved in trying to survive. So I think the question that we have to ask is Singapore's tax transfer system fair and progressive? And where the mobility of capital and talent taxes are international, it requires Singapore to be competitive. So we have realized recently from the news that around the world, everybody is trying to reduce taxes so that they are more competitive. So where does that place us? Even on the world ranking of competitiveness, I see that this year we have actually gone down a notch. So the changes that are happening around us in the world is definitely going to impact on us and our survival. So the budget, we should be able to give good feedback to the government that allows us to stabilize our economy in the coming year. And that's why the input, and I thank you all for taking part in today's discussion, the input that you're going to give will certainly make a big difference. So I'll stop here for now and leave it to the people who are here this afternoon to say their piece.
So George, if I may start.
Yes, please, Abhijit. Good to see you. I wanted to say hello before we started. Sorry, then I got caught up.
Yeah, thank you, Manu. Thank you, George. As you probably know, I come from a tax background. So what I'll try to do is share some of my thoughts looking at the socio-economic landscape from a tax angle and suggest some possible pointers if the government can consider. So that's the way I'll approach my discussion. The first point, again, I'm coming in the same sequence as you highlighted. Let's look at the green agenda first. And to your point, George, that there's a need to have solutions in order to address the green commitment, okay? And therefore, there should be investment to that solution, and government cannot do it all by themselves. So there should be a private collaboration, partnership, contribution coming through, which should be encouraged. Right now, if I'm having a company, organization, and I want to contribute to the development of some technology, and that can be done by a third party, that per se, if I make a donation under an IPC, I get a 250% tax deduction. But in this circumstance, first, there's no IPC. And second, if I make that contribution per se, I do not get a deduction as a corporate vehicle. So I, as a corporate vehicle, should be encouraged to make that contribution to the SME sectors who are developing unique solutions for greening the ecosystem, for eradication of the plastic waste from the ecosystem, for ensuring our coastal belts are all properly cleaned up, etc., etc. So there should be a proper provision that should be brought in place, that to the extent I contribute to help develop any solution for the betterment of Singapore, maybe like an IPC status, I should get a double deduction or 2.5 times deduction. If it is beyond Singapore, at least I should get 100% deduction. Because that is how I'll achieve a net zero, not only from Singapore, but for the region, because we have to address the whole region. Ultimately, the impact happening elsewhere will also impact us in Singapore. So that is the first point I wanted to highlight. And on the same principle, people like us, individuals, which we are sitting here, we do contribute to the charity, we do. And we do get tax deduction for that. It helps our charitable purpose. I'm saying on the same vein, can we also do a contribution to a national climate change or a national green fund where we collectively contribute? We get a tax deduction, maybe a benefit, a super deduction, whatever you call it, 2.5 times. But the government then see that the citizen is getting involved into the process where there's a public-private partnership funding can come through. So for every dollar that we put in, Temasek can do a matching fund. But that's, I leave it to the policymakers. But I'm saying from a tax point of view, I think we should encourage both the corporates as well as the individuals to contribute back for greening activity. And there's a lot of discussion going on the carbon side, but not much of discussion is going on the plastic side. And I'm sure all of you are aware that we are very bad on the plastic management even till today, although some of the shopping malls, they have started their agenda. So we should be embarking very soon on a plastic credit mechanism, and the carbon credit exchange has been set up. But unfortunately, that carbon credit exchange is not exempt from tax. And if you look at the history, when we have set up the SICCI and some of the other exchanges, we gave them initial years of tax break so that they can survive. Now, for the similar basis, if we can help with the carbon exchange and any other renewable credit exchanges that we want to set up, we should give them some support, at least some tax incentive for the initial period, because that takes a lot of cost to build it up. And on the flip side, people like you, me, and other corporates, if they are contributing to buy some carbon credits, then they should again get certain additional deduction if that will be helpful. It is just to encourage them, to make them come out and contribute for that the net zero game that the government is propounding under the green plan, correct? So that's the green side of the thing, just some of the points. On the healthcare, interestingly, as you probably know, under our tax system, that if a company incurs a medical cost for the employees, the deduction is restricted in their hand to 1% of the total remuneration. Now, that is an archaic, age-old rule, has got no relevance in the current cost when it has gone up so much. And with the COVID and the multiple swabs, and now we are opening up, we want our people to go overseas, they have to go through multiple swabs. At least the basic, that deduction should be deductible. Because currently the way the construct of the law is only restricted to 1% of the remuneration. And so I think we should ask the government to relook at it and see if they can lift it, if not totally, at least to a reasonable level. And to the very basic, at least the swab test and all the COVID-related cost should be deductible, because that is very important for the companies to sustain their employees. So without going into aging is another ballgame. I'm just focusing on the COVID point on the healthcare side. And the other interesting point, which I have been always looking at is, we as an individual, we buy insurance for our healthcare. Now, if you look in certain countries, when you buy insurance for healthcare, you get a deduction from your salary. Now, in Singapore, we do not have that. There is only capped to a CPF thingy, and that has got no relevance. So if the government is saying that, okay, you own the space of incurring the cost, and together we'll address the aging population, should we not then allow me to claim a deduction against my taxable income for all the premium that I'm paying to the insurance companies? Because that way, then I'm covering myself, I'm looking after myself, and government is to that extent less onerous for the government. So that's a important point. And at the very basic level, anybody who is on the 50-year plus, they should be compulsorily going for health screening. And therefore, at least tax relief should be given for that medical cost, maybe up to a cap of $500, if that makes sense. So that will then take care of the aging employees, because we have to keep them available for our system because it's aging, but we have to keep them available because we have to use their experience and the knowledge for our future. So I'll just stop there because there are a lot of other guests who can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit. I think you raised some very interesting points, and these are very relevant issues in the coming years. We'll come back to you again because I still would like to hear what you have to say about taxes per se. But meanwhile, let's open the floor to the others. Can I hear some other views, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Giri Venkatesh. First and foremost, thank you very much for this invitation and to the board directors of SICCI and also to Mr. Manu Bhaskaran. It's a privilege to be here. I work in the automotive industry, and I'd just like to make 2 points. First is on the green transition. I noticed in the email that came from MOF, I think there's good input on the EV for the future, and I think that's very good. But I'd like to take it a little bit more further than just focusing on EV. The goal that we need to be looking at is carbon neutrality at the end of the day. And the outcome of that is less emissions. But we also have to look at it from a broader social structure in Singapore as well. If we look at pure EVs, battery EVs itself, it would be, I think, focusing very much on a very small niche of the market, perhaps those that have the infrastructure capability for charging stations and so on. But what about the HDB dwellers, the car owners who own HDBs? They can also contribute more towards carbon neutrality. I think this is something similar to what Mr. Abhijit Ghosh, I think, mentioned in a different sphere as well. So for example, the reality of it is that when things open up, when the borders open up, many Singaporeans will want to drive across to Malaysia, right? But do they have the peace of mind of having a charging station if they have a pure EV vehicle? I don't think that's going to be there. So I think that the government should expand this to beyond just looking at EVs and looking at even hybrid electric vehicles, right? You are still contributing towards a bigger picture carbon neutrality, but at the same time, you have a peace of mind as a consumer. I think this is something that I would like to consider here. The second point I want to raise to the point that Mr. Manu brought about just now, which is the pandemic turnaround. Yes, it will eventually happen. And I think the government is also saying that they're fairly confident about economic forecast. But the question that I have in mind is the workforce, especially the younger generation, who are now, obviously we are all now very used to this, to Zooming or Teams. This is a new way of working now. Now, that said, I know of many younger people who are going through a lot of mental health issues as well. So coming on healthcare, I think we need to look at that how do we overcome that? I understand, for example, in NUH, the waiting list for mental healthcare patients, I think is 6 months to 9 months or something like that. So it's a serious issue that we need to deal with. But also, I think what the world has taught us now is that we need to be much more mobile. So the question is the younger generation in Singapore mobile enough? I think this is a question that we need to address. I don't know. I have a feeling that perhaps we're still very secluded. We're still very within Singapore. We'd like to bring people in, but how about moving people out? I think this is a question that perhaps we should address as well. Thank you very much.
Hi, George, Ramesh here. May I just ask Mr. Giri, how would he suggest we look at addressing this mental issue amongst the young? I mean, it's a very important area, but Mr. Giri, do you have any ideas on how the government can address the mental issues concerning the younger generation? Thank you, Mr. Giri.
Yeah, very, very good question. And this is a question that I've been grappling about myself. I think one of the things is that the organizations, I think many organizations, especially in the HR area, perhaps need to pay a little bit more attention to having some kind of a specialist role, whether it's on a mentoring role or a coaching role, perhaps. A coaching role, I think, would be very good. I'm also a certified professional coach myself, and that's something that I do within my organization. So I think this is something that the government can perhaps steer organizations towards. And this I think would also be applicable to the public sector and not just the private sector. I hope I answered your question, sir.
If I may just build on what Mr. Giri has said. So just as a quick introduction, first of all, thank you so much for hosting me here, Mr. George, Manu sir, Rameshji, and others. I'm Saurav. I work with an organization called Gallup. So we are a global research organization where we capture data for the whole world. So 99% of the world's population's opinions we capture. So just building on what Mr. Giri has talked about well-being, if I may share back some data as well, because like I said, Gallup brings data to the world. So this is indicators for the world poll. So we're the only organization that captures opinions of 99% of the world's population. And this is the data on when we ask people, how would you evaluate your life today in Singapore? This is Singapore data. And what I see, which is a little bit worrisome, is a downward trend over these years around how people are perceiving their life to be. And that's not just in the area of well-being, it's sort of indicating on other metrics as well there. So when Mr. Giri talked about well-being, it's a really important driver, not just for today, but also when we ask people, how do you evaluate your life in 5 years from now? You again start to see at least some dips from the previous years as well. And we also got data around this when we compare it to Singapore, to other countries in the region as well. So that tells us how we are doing vis-a-vis other countries in the region as well. So something we need to pay attention to, and that's what my recommendations also was, to track the impact of every dollar spent on the budget with an ROI. When I say ROI, tracking how does that impact the GDP of the country. I think that's a key driver when you think about contributions. And the second factor that just kind of building on the well-being aspect is how do we do that effectively is equipping the silver lining generation. The government is doing tremendous work in equipping the silver lining generation in providing them, various facilities, investments, and so on and so forth. But how about contribution back to the economy? And how can we do that? Is equipping them with the skills and knowledge to become coaches, to what Dr. Giri mentioned here earlier. Because what they bring in is a lot of wisdom with them. Now, yes, the new generation of people have got enough research and study. We're happy to share offline on the millennial generation, Gen Zs, and how they're different from the rest of the generations out there. But what they seek from the senior generation is not to be a boss to them and tell them what to do, but rather to be a coach, a mentor, or guide. What they seek is your wisdom, not just to tell me what to do, because they have enough knowledge. They have access to Google these days. They have more knowledge than the silver generation, but they want the wisdom. So equipping the silver linings generation, people are retired, to contribute back to the economy by upgrading their skills and knowledge. Because when I see an economy growing, the GDP growing, what makes it grow is two things: involvement and contribution by the citizens of the country. So we cannot dismiss the silver lining generation and empower them to be able to contribute to a high level. Now, of course, they will not be able to do the physical work that is required, but they can do the mental work, the developmental work for the next generation of people. So that's a couple of things that I wanted to share as well. I'm happy to share more, but enough data on Singapore and on the whole world to compare and contrast to all the comments that some of you are making as well. I'm going to pause here.
Thank you, Saurav. I think that you've made a very, very good point. This is something that we have taken up actually last year, in which we would like to take up again, because on the one hand, government is encouraging employment of older generation workers who come with a lot of experience. Maybe some of them require a little bit of upskilling, but at the same time, we have a huge number of SMEs that are crying out for support. And the Japanese and the Koreans have a system where they actually bring in these retired silverhead, as you call it, it's a silverhead program, to work with SMEs, especially when SMEs are going to banks for loans and grants. They will sit with them and ensure that the grant or the loan is tailored to meet a specific need of the SME that would allow them to survive and move on. We had suggested this actually last year to the Enterprise Singapore people, but maybe this year we should reiterate that point, especially since you have brought this in. Because as you correctly said, we cannot have the silver lining people, which also includes people like me, to sit around and wait for something to happen. They can be very useful in the economic growth of the younger generation population, as well as the SMEs. I think I have a great concern for SMEs, because I think a lot more needs to be done in the current situation as far as SMEs are concerned. So if you have the others also, if they have any thoughts to share on this, it would be very helpful. As you know, the Chamber has a SME center, where we have business advisors and so on, who go out and meet up with the people who are SMEs and try to see how we can help them. But we can always build more efficiency into the program if we have people like you coming to work with us and help us in what we are doing. Thank you so much for the statistical input that we have given. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, George.
May I share?
Yes, Supriya.
So thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I'm a senior advisor with McKinsey and also a consultant with a strategic advisor to many private companies as well as nonprofits. And I would like to suggest on the areas of green as well as health, because the industrial age city design led to a sort of very, very large scale mall type of project of the city. And so in downtown or elsewhere, these little walkable areas with little shops, home, family businesses, smaller businesses don't have customers. And that has become even worse during the pandemic. But in order to rejuvenate the neighborhoods and have a design variety of different products and things like that available, building back after COVID requires that you provide some incentives in the system so that you do not bring them all down to zero. Now, what is actually happening is we see that the delivery vehicles and people delivering food is just endemic all over the place, and the plastic and the Amazon cardboards that they use, everything is just, and people cannot help it when they see the price is 1/10 of just walking across to your neighborhood NTUC and buying something. They're ordering something online. Now the question is that if you walk across, you go and see the neighborhood, you might drop in on a neighborhood store, you might have much more sense of community, but all that's destroyed because of the way it's been developed, and there's no penalty on this kind of packaging. So in the middle, what the Amazon people used to do and the delivery used to do is they'll just bring a bunch of things and drop it at your doorstep without a bag. But that's not what is the true way to manage it. Is industry by industry by industry. You've got to first motivate companies to scope out their own scope 3 emissions, not just scope 1, scope 2, all through the supply chain. And then the carbon tax is not enough. Just this financialization of the whole economy is not enough to make behavior change. What you need to do is have that the footprint, then you pilot the reusable packaging, then you use nudges, behavioral design to lower the returns that is happening on every little piece of thing that's possible to return also. Why should it be allowed? And then you have you track even down the supply chain, because the large companies have got extended producer responsibility, which means they have to collect back equipment when it's done. They have to offer a meaningful price for when they upgrade equipment. It should not be that you're allowed to just throw your refrigerators outside and it piles up in some part of the city. Just cannot afford to have that kind of design. And Singapore is not doing a good job as of now on this. So it's the best way to do it is now when we are coming out of COVID, is motivate people to get out and go and get your food, get out and deliver, pick up your razor blades, and do not use plastic. So this it's not enough. There's been a number of campaigns where you can return your old shoes and then they'll make it into small globules which will be used in and the waterways. We really have to have more education about how, and every individual has to have education on this. And finally, you have to, facilitate restoration. It's not enough to just say, let's build a license to operate and therefore let everybody feel good when they're doing some, I've financed a forest somewhere and so I can merrily go ahead and emit here. It's not okay. What you need to do is, have I restored, have I sequestered, have I collected back the carbon that I have actually done? And so supply chain, industry by industry by industry, just like we had that future economy and we had all those the digital transformation. Believe you me, what has happened 10 years ago when nobody believed that Google will be so much a part of our lives, that will be in this generation, and within 2025 to 2030 we will have a different life, and that train has already left the station. And so Singapore with our green action plan has done a good job of doing it at the larger level. But as individual citizens, how much are we part of it at every level, from the payments that we make, the micro payments that we make, to the large billions of dollars that we attract? This is the scene. So I'm happy to give a detailed write-up on what I mean, but I just wanted to pass on this suggestion to you.
Yeah, Ms. Sen, thank you very much, because again, you have, like the others, raised some very valuable input. First, I will take you up on the offer for sending us a written piece. Secondly, I think what you are talking about requires us to do a webinar, especially because what you have said addresses a problem of the SMEs. And we will reach out to you to see how we can work with you to do this. Thank you for your ideas and thank you for the information that you have shared. We look forward to working with you. We will be contacting.
Thank you. I mean, one last thing I wanted to say on that is that when you tell people to start, and you start with the environment, you lose them very quickly. But when you tell them that they can make money out of it and they can profit from this transition, you can convince them, and that's the time has come, which is now.
Yeah, well, that's why we will see how we can effectively use what you have said and get you to work with the SME Center. Mr. Mishra, you are next in line. Thank you.
Yes.
Your request is, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Anyway, just like to introduce myself. I'm Satish Mishra. I'm speaking from Bali, where I live. I've been in Indonesia for now 21 years. I'm currently writing a book called The Archipelago, which hopefully will be published by Harvard University Press sometime next year. what was interesting about, and thanks, of course, for inviting me to join the session today. One of the most interesting things about the small write-up that was sent was how many difficult policy areas it actually mentions. And I'd like to speak to 2 or 3 of them, because we don't have more background information. So a number of policy areas and also a number of technical areas on which there is already quite a lot of disagreement, and I don't know the basis on which Singapore has made its projections and so on. The first one, which is obviously center stage now with the GST possible hike, is the whole issue of inflation. And one of the things that we are seeing in a lot of places is that end of COVID, the kind of inflationary expectations that it could set up, it's not a normal situation like we're pulling out of a recession. That there is a whole issue of how do you model inflationary expectations coming out of a major global pandemic like this. In some areas, in fact, we're seeing this even in Bali now, that in the tourism industry, in a number of other associated industries, there is likely to be a massive increased spike simply because people are just exhausted of not being able to move, not being able to have joint holidays with their families and so on. So modeling inflation in this context, I think is really quite difficult. And it would be nice to have some idea of how these inflationary expectations, which are now a serious issue, have been estimated in the government budget projections and so on. So that's one. The second issue is closely tied to it, which is what kind of a economy or what kind of a post-COVID world do we have in mind? Because clearly, as we were hearing from Supriya and others, that COVID has actually led to a massive restructuring in the way we work, in the way we shop, in the way we access medical and other information, and so on and so on. So are we talking about emerging out of COVID in a slightly modified world, or are we really talking about one where the commercial flows will be significantly different? That's not. So we have a number of embedded assumptions, in any kind of budget discussion that I think would benefit from a wider discussion. Similarly, we have another huge issue there relating to equality. I mean, it was interesting that even the concept of a wealth tax was introduced, because what I see from the write-up is what we are really focusing on is not so much inequality, but making sure that everybody keeps their head above water and, is basically doesn't get pushed into poverty. When we're talking about inequality, invariably, we are talking about wealth. We are talking about corporate wealth in particular, rather than just interpersonal differences in wealth. And so again, I think either the discussion there has just to be dropped, or it requires a different and more sophisticated discussion of how to manage this massive expansion in inequality, which is inequality which is taking place everywhere. So I think that is, and it's because of that now we are seeing a global effort to organize minimum corporate tax rates and so on and so on, simply because it's terribly easy to escape the tax net in many of the, even the most developed and regulated countries. I come to my last point, which is again related to this post-COVID world. Is one of the things that is often missed, but is come to the fore in the COVID discussion now, is the nature of diseases. If we look at what is happening to deaths from different types of diseases, even though COVID is clearly, we're talking about communicable disease here, something like 70 to 80% of global deaths in many countries really come from lifestyle diseases. So we are talking about diabetes, we're talking about hypertension, we're talking about cancers of different kind, et cetera, et cetera. And as more and more governments offer national health insurance, the issue again is, how do you get the citizen to reduce obesity, reduce some of the addiction on various kinds of food, et cetera, et cetera. In the old days, the feeling always was that this is a matter of individual will. So you had Weight Watchers, you had group therapy of different kinds. Now what we have is a structure of marketing, of labeling, and so on, that as well as a kind of consumer environment from which is very difficult for individuals to escape. So here is a role for the government to actually come and tackle this head on. And there are many countries who have programs on reduction of child obesity, for example, and so on. So the budget may well want to consider specialized programs on trying to tackle what is really a huge epidemic now. So I think that all of these things, when combined with the great pressures for innovation, particularly in AI and others, require a significant rethinking of the competitive edge of Singapore and what its place is going to be in this changing structure of neighboring economies and the global economies and so on. So I'd love to get more information on it. I'm available for any kind of a follow-up discussion and so on. And thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you. Mr. Jaiswal, you'll be next, but I just want to have a small aside to Mr. Mishra. Mr. Mishra, thank you for reaching out to us all the way from Bali. You said you are doing a book on the archipelago. Is it a historical book or is it a current situation book?
No, it's about the large-scale transformation that Indonesia has gone through in the last 20 years. But a lot of it is about the unintended consequences of this change, which are now affecting not only Indonesia, but similar changes elsewhere also. So it's very much current, but it's clearly rooted in the experience of the last 20 years.
Thank you. We look forward to receiving the book when it's done.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can do a webinar with you when the book is done also. You are sitting
with pleasure.
Yeah.
I've got 2 more chapters, so I'll let you know when that's.
Yeah. But don't forget in your introductory note to talk about the historical presence of the Indians and some of the influence that they have had in various aspects of Indonesian life.
Yeah, well, there's no way to talk about Indonesia without talking about the Indians. So I take the point completely.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Jaiswal, you are next.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Judge. And Mano, Abhijit, everyone. I am the Chairman and Managing Director of Pickmore International Private Limited. I run my own SME business, and I have multi-geographical locations where operations carry on. So I'll focus more relating to those areas and relating to businesses. Of course, Mr. Abhijit being tax experts and all, they have already shared about the tax related matters. Now, coming back to the main, the first point I would like to mention is on the staff mobility. It has been almost 2 years, and due to whatever restrictions and non-vaccinations and other travel restrictions, all our staffs has not been able to move out of Singapore to other locations, and that is has started affecting a lot of productivity and other corporate governance issues. So I think we need to look a way that this staff mobility can be allowed in a positive way, particularly while the staff has been vaccinated, plus country has been vaccinated almost 85% of population and all. In this scenario, of course, while we are going towards living with COVID kind of virus situation, I think the staff mobility should be given more focus, and in the sense they should be allowed to go out of the country, and while coming back, of course, with the COVID protocols and all, they should not be just left stranded there. Otherwise, that is affecting the managing the business in different regional locations. And the second point I would like to touch upon on the green energy and our Singapore's target to bring down the carbon by 2030. towards that, I think one good way to incentivize companies will be to probably, deploy solar panels in their, like, warehouses, or maybe the factories in the rooftops and all. So whatever related cost maybe, can be like incentivized, and that will not only help country towards achieving the green status. At the same time, the companies will be encouraged to use this kind of green solar energy in the applications. And my last point, the third point, of course, will be relating to the main power crunch. In my own experiences, I have found during these last 2 years, those foreign workers and all, whatever we had employed, and those went back, none of them are allowed to come back. And that is affecting quite substantially to run the business, or even forget about expansion. So I think these factors should be, looked into in the coming budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaiswal. I have another person who has some opinions. Mr. Prashant Agarwal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you very much for the opportunity to attend this. My background is I run a startup called the Hyphen Group, which is into financial literacy and financial education. My recommendation is, so what has happened over the last 2 years is digital payments have skyrocketed as people haven't been able to go out, use of e-commerce, multiple reasons that I don't need to specify, but that has led to a very large number of growth in credit cards, number of bank accounts that people have opened, and that has made the financial management quite complex for the individuals. Now, in Singapore, the Credit Bureau, which is Credit Bureau of Singapore, is not an open bureau, which means that only members of the bureau can access the data, or the individual themselves can access data, which is different to a lot of other leading economies in the world, like Hong Kong, like UK, US, where bureau is made open, it is made commercial, and you allow startups, you allow technology companies to use that data to provide consolidated information to people so they can make better financial decisions. This has been an ongoing discussion in Singapore for a long time, and I would really recommend that we should look into this, keep up with the times. Also, related to this is open banking. There has been some positive steps taken around open banking, especially with SG Findex, where some banks have consolidated. Now you can see your consolidated accounts across 8 banks. But our research tells us that people don't see that as unbiased, because a bank showing, you don't go to one bank to see I give them access to see my entire banking portfolio. So to make it unbiased, you need to make this into an open banking platform. Again, let the industry drive the innovation. Let the industry take feedback from the users and give the users what the information in the format they desire, and advise which is best for the user, not best for the financial institution. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a useful idea. We'll see how to incorporate this in the suggestions. Thank you for coming up today to talk to us. Do I see any hands raised?
George, do we have a little minute? Maybe I can just chip in if no one else.
Yes, sure. I think, I don't mind extending the time if we are getting good input, because this is what we need to tell the government. Thank you, Ananya. Please go ahead.
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. In the interest of time, I'll keep it short. I had 2 points. One was about the mental health issues. And again, this is not directed just at the younger generation, but about the migrant workers. I think they have been living in Singapore, pretty much stuck in Singapore for the last 2 years. And many of them have not been able to go back home. And I do foresee a a mental health challenge coming in managing this workforce in the future. So I don't know if there can be a proposal wherein we can ask the government to kind of intervene, give them some counseling support, give them some kind of subsidy maybe to get themselves involved in various conversations with mental health issues and provide them that kind of support. So that was one of the points that I had in mind. The other was about each citizen taking responsibility for the green action. I come from the ag industry. Sorry, I hadn't introduced myself. So I'm an ex-journalist and I lead corporate communications for Cargill, Asia and Europe. So I come from the ag industry, and climate change is something that we have been talking about for a long, long time. But it seems like it is the onus of the governments and the industries and the corporates, and citizens per se do very little to own that piece where each one of us contribute in making, keep making our world sustainable. One of the ideas that I was thinking about is about saving power. I know there is a lot of conversation about the rising cost of power. So how do we incentivize maybe citizens by saying that, okay, if you consume 20% less power this year, if your PUB bill or your electricity bill is less by 20% from what it was last year, maybe you get a 50% waiver in your 13th month bill or something, but something to incentivize people. Like, we've been hearing that it just add a little bit of an incentive. Don't just keep, telling people, but maybe just give a small incentive to say, if you're saving on energy, if you're saving on power, you get a benefit. And that is a waiver, or that can be in terms of, tax, I don't know, it could be tax exemption, but something that will motivate people to play their role in the whole plan, and not just depend on the government and the policymakers to drive and to execute. So that was my 2 pence, and I'm dot on time, so I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, well, we hope we see more of you in our chambers activities, because I think you have a lot to contribute. Where are you working now?
I'm working in Cargill. I'm from Olam, so I've had a 7-year tenure in Olam, and now I'm with Cargill.
Okay, good. We have your connect, so we'll be in touch with you. Thank you for the ideas. We have a Mr. Vijay Barja, who's also said he would like to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. George, and everyone for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to speak. So I'm a managing director of a New Vista Technologies as well as New Smart. So just give you, I'll just take a few minutes. We are a leading company in, helping companies go digitization, complete enterprise solution, as well as the HR solutions. Okay, so I have a few points here to make today. My first point here is the COVID travel policy. Okay, what happens is, if you just see in Singapore, and I raised it in quite a number of forums, that COVID travel policy, that means for Singapore citizen and Singaporean PR, is different from foreigners. Foreigners means the EP holders or the dependent pass holders, which are residents of Singapore. Okay, so people, Singapore citizens, by the way, I'm a Singapore citizen, so I just want to clarify over here. So Singapore citizens and Singapore PR, they can travel anywhere and come back to Singapore. Okay, and there have been a lot of frustrations among those foreigners, So the skin for those foreigners and for Singaporean is same, all over the world is same. So why the government is differentiating? Like, why foreigners cannot come back when he is a resident of Singapore? I'm not saying for the people you issue a social visit pass. I'm just saying for people, those who are EP holders or those who are workers, those who are fully vaccinated, why not the policy is same as far as the COVID policy is concerned? That means the travel policy, COVID travel policy specifically. So that is my one point. Second point is the digitization. Okay, what happened? I hats on to a Singapore government. they have been fantastic and they have been giving a lot of support to SMEs. But what happened during last 2 years, most of the Singaporean companies, they rely, especially for the, because we work with many mid-market companies, they rely for digitization or any computerization on the grants. So recently what has happened, the grant, which used to take like 1 month time, now it is taking at least three to four times. That means it may take about 4 to 4 months time. So what happened is, because of that, those companies will lag behind, eventually there is a cascading effect, So probably government should think of some fast track approvals for these grants. When there's a crunch of a manpower everywhere, it is there, so we speak to a lot with the Enterprise Singapore, IMDA, I have been in touch with them, we are in their panel. So, but I speak to them a lot, but I understand where they are coming, but probably we should have a policy where should have, because since the Singaporean company is just relying on the grant to go for it, so they should be faster. Then another thing, I have two more points, is a health. So health is, anyway, most of you have touched the health, and the expenses have gone up, So even your travel expenses, your everything, you have to go for this. So what is the government direction like? For example, I have a friends who are working with Keppel Shipyard. They have to go for 2 times, every week, at least 2 times for their swab test. So how long, I know there are certain things which nobody is in control, but what would be the government direction specifically, when it comes to the individuals and companies to extend these, benefits for the health. And the final point is about the foreign talent. I know that every country have to protect their own citizens. That is right. But many things, what has happened specifically in the digitization. In fact, I have employed myself, lot of Singaporeans. Recently, we have employed, above 40, we got a huge grant from IMDA. We are in their panel for TESA program. And we have employed, we are employing, like we committed for 10 senior people above 40. And we will do that in a year's time. But what happened is, there are certain jobs, because of that, it is going out. It becomes inevitable when it comes to this one, specifically in the IT segment, So whether government, because of this restriction for the foreign talent, and especially in the engineering side, where you definitely need like infrastructure side, when you have to build up an infrastructure, or, we work with pharmaceutical companies where there's a manufacturing happening, you need definitely some foreign talent. So what would be the policy, in the coming budget? Okay, thanks for giving me an opportunity. So I think these are my views.
Thank you, Mr. Bareja. We will be in touch with you, because I think you've raised some points that have also been told to us by others. So we will look forward to working with you in the near future, because the budget is only next year. I'm sure in between we will have some sessions that we can add on to what is being done today, but this is a start.
Thank you.
We have a few more people who have said they have some points. There's some things that I've seen in the chat, but perhaps you might want to elaborate on it. May I call on Srikant Nanak, please, if you are able to tell us? I also see a long chat from Pradeep, Mr. Pradeep Cletus. So we'll start with Mr. Srikant Nanak. Maybe you want to summarize what the point that you wanted to make. Mr. Srikant Nanak? Okay, so we'll look at your comment and then we'll come back to you later on it. Mr. Punit Oza, do you have anything to add to the chat? Okay. Ramesh?
I was just responding to the gentleman earlier who had talked about differentiating travel policy for Singaporeans and PRs and EP holders. Actually, from what I know, the government has started allowing EP holders, S pass holders, and work permit holders to come back in stages for different industries.
Mm.
And I understand that one of the conditions that they look at before approving the travel policy is that they have to be vaccinated and completed both the doses in whichever country they are coming from. So this is slowly taking place, and they're slowly bringing back the various category holders of workers back to Singapore. That's all.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ramesh, for the clarification. We have
Sorry,
our.
George, I'll just take 1 minute to clarify here. Actually, I have employment pass holders, and they are not being given permission for a couple of months. So I'm making the point very specific. Huh? It's not that even if they're vaccinated or what. So there is a clear delay in approvals of EPs. So that is really affecting the business environment and sending them overseas.
Okay, Mr. Jaiswal, maybe what I can suggest is that if you can give us the specific examples of your employees who are facing this problem, the kind of vaccination they have done and the places that they're going to for visiting the business connections that you have, then we can forward this to the relevant ministry and see what can be done to help.
Yeah, so that's fine. That we will take on specific basis, but in general, also from other industry, pilots and all this, I'm hearing their staffs and all, they are either not able to send out, or if they're sending, they have a issue of bringing
coming
them
back.
Yes.
Yeah, coming back.
So
Yeah.
that's the point I wanted to generalize. Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Johnson has something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jaiswal. I think we have had several queries on this.
Yeah.
Companies that have BTP, the business travel pass, can actually send people out. Others will have, a tough time doing it. Now, the BTP pass is only given to one person in the company. So at any point in time, only one person can travel out. And when you come back, no vaccination, no quarantine. So that's the policy right now. Yeah. We hope that they'll open up the.
If they go to countries like maybe like those are not under VTL and all this, how about that, like India or Malaysia or other places?
Okay, the BTP pass in principle does not have any quarantine, but the ESG will advise you on the protocols. So this changes by the day.
Okay.
But they will advise you on the protocols once you. So what you can do is you can apply for a BTP, and normally they'll give. Most companies are entitled for one BTP pass at least.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So George, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Prasad. I'm running my own law firm. Thank you for the invitation from SICCI and Mr. George and Mr. Manu's excellent presentation so far. I just like to comment. I'm not a trained budget person, but just a few comments I would like to make about the recent announcement by Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat on the Temasek co-investment, $1 billion investment for large corporations. So I think if I can share the screen, can I show you the topic I'm talking about now?
Mm-hmm.
I can share the screen.
Yeah, allow him to share.
Yeah, can you see the screen, please? Can you see the screen?
No, we can't.
Can't see the screen. Okay, give me a minute, please. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, the budget 2021 announcement by Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat, $1 billion investment for large companies. Right. So this co-funding by government and Temasek, $500 billion each. So rather than this, I think it's more important for SMEs, the government to focus on SMEs, which in 2019, there were, I think, almost 300,000 businesses incorporated in Singapore. And of that, of course, you all know that SMEs become 99% of all enterprises. So I would say that SMEs are more in need of help, where government funding is required. And of course, government has funded some other schemes, but direct investment to help SMEs is what is crucial at this current moment, I think, especially in view of COVID and all the other difficulties faced by SMEs. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Prasad. I don't know how many of you are aware, but the Singapore Indian Chamber has been the champion of SMEs since 1985. In fact, we are the ones who brought up the problems of SMEs. But taking the point that you have just made, I think the problem that the government faces is that we have the SME centers now spread out through the ethnic chambers, the Chinese, the Indian, the Malay, the manufacturers, and also through the various districts where we have advisors and people who are meeting the SMEs. And they actually handhold for applications for grants and so on to be given to them. But from my understanding of study of SMEs around the world, and please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, it is true that SMEs need help, but how do you decide which SME with money is going to survive? Because you can't have a government grant or government funds that just distributes money to SMEs. So there has to be a selection process. That's why one of the suggestions that we made last year, which we will try to repeat again this year, is that, we have, as I said earlier today, the silver-haired people who have work experience, who can work with SMEs, try and tailor the manner in which they are working and make them more agile to deal with the current economic situation, which would then enable them to get grants. So your idea in itself is a good idea, and we will certainly see how we can take this forward and make it work. But to help all the SMEs that exist, with handouts to survive is something that may not be possible. I do not wish to throw cold water on what you have suggested, but I'm just trying to be practical from having had the experience of working with SMEs over the years. So the Chamber is committed to helping SMEs. We have an SME center and we work closely with the Enterprise Singapore. And in this coming budget suggestions, we will certainly include a lot of suggestions that are geared towards helping the SMEs. So thank you for your input and thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Do we have any more people who would like to say something, make comments? I think your screen share can be taken off now. Yeah. Okay, do we have, I see Rabin Junjunwala here. Would you like to say something? Because I'm sure from your area of business, there must be some needs that you would like to bring up for the next budget. Rabin? Yeah, we have our Vice Chairman, Mr. Kishore Daryanani, with us. Mr. Kishore, would you like to add some comments to the discussions that have been made, because you are yourself an international trader?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm running a company, import and export electronics company called Ganga Jamuna Electronics. Now, we do a lot of imports and exports, but with the recent hike in freight rates all over the world, we find exports a little bit difficult because prices of goods become expensive for an importer overseas to import. I would, of course, like the government if they can tweak a little and give some incentives in the freight business, like China is doing actually. They're giving to their exporters some kind of incentive to export more goods out. If we can get some kind of incentives, that'd be good for us. It'll help all the exporters in Singapore as well. My second point also is, there's another point. We have this problem of logistics. We have a very huge shortage of workers or staff. And I think a lot of the exporters I speak to or importers I speak to, they have this tension. They cannot run the business smoothly because they have a shortage of staff. If the government can maybe relax a little bit of rules to allow in more foreigners come in the logistics center to help them, with these kind of minor problems, which actually translate into major problems for the importer or exporter. I want the government to look into this. And I would, of course, like to say again, thank you for everybody attending this webinar. It was very fruitful. I did learn quite a few things. I'm not an economist, but I did learn a few things there. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Sorry, can I add something? Because you had wanted to talk to me. I had a technical problem before.
No, that's okay. We're happy that you were able to come back to us.
Yeah. See, basically, all the suggestions which I've given are quite good, and most of my points have already been covered. Only thing is that when you are doing a determination of incentives for companies in Singapore, almost all the companies are affected. So when there is some sort of a picking of incentives and only giving to a particular sector, the other sectors get deprived, although they are affected. And this is something which can be factored in, especially the small companies, how they can be supported in these difficult times.
What is the area of business that you are now currently in, Mr. Junjunwala?
I'm in the business of supplying agro inputs and plant nutrients and organic fertilizers. So all the projects are getting affected because of which my business is getting affected.
Okay, thank you. We take note of what you have said.
Yes, thank you. And overall, it's a very good effort. I would like to congratulate you, and I hope this something what you suggest to the government will find a change in the budget announcement that the government will going to make.
Actually, for the benefit of the those who are present here today, last year we had Manu's wisdom also, and together we had made a submission, and the government did take up some of the points. In fact, they had expressed happiness at some of the points that we had made. So we hope that this year we will be able to give them more ideas and suggestions for the budget, which they will certainly look at. I have another person here, Mr. Saurav Atri. You have something else to say again?
Yeah, Mr. George, because Mr. Kishore also brought this point in, and I also want to sort of put a perspective here around the challenge around employability, both of local talent and global talent. So if I may just help reframe this perspective a little bit more, and I'm sharing this from a thought process of macroeconomics, because Gallup also consults governments around the world globally. And here's an interesting perspective if you think about this, and this is again coming from our research for the World Bank. So we do consult the World Bank, United Nations on many factors globally, especially on policy decision making. And when we were looking for the foundational needs of human beings globally, fundamentally we might think, oh, people need food and shelter as a primary factor for them to survive in a country. But turns out that when we were doing research in middle of Sudan, and we asked the women there that, the United Nations spends billions of dollars to throw money, to provide food for you. They drop food. Do you go and grab it? So you know what those women said? Those women said that actually we would die rather go and eat that food. That must be very surprising. Why is that so? That when the United Nations is spending billions of dollars to go and, provide food, the women are not eating it. So they asked him, why is it that you're not eating that food? Why are we spending so much money? He said, because, on the way to grab that food, my daughters have been raped. My sons have been killed. So we would rather die in poverty than basically take care of, or feed on that food. So the important factor here is, while you might think food and shelter are primary factors, but actually that's a secondary factor. The first factor is law and order, which is, again, this is already taken care of in Singapore. But what's important here is the dynamics into growing the GDP of a country. So we say what comes out of food and shelter is institutions and infrastructure, which is what we already have. This has already been established in Singapore foundationally. But this is the missing piece here, good jobs, which the government also understands. They've been investing heavily in creating good jobs, but the challenge is the people are not perceiving those to be good jobs. And that's a factor that is causing a big upheaval locally in the government as well, that, hey, why should we restrict the foreigners from coming into the country? Because they feel, it's a perception that they are taking the good jobs away from it. So this is very important, is every citizen in the country needs to feel that they are rightly employed based on the talent, skills, and knowledge. And that's where transparency is going to be the key to sort of manage this negative sentiment that's going across the country right now that foreigners are taking jobs away, which unfortunately may not always be the case, because it's also a talent and a skill and a experience issue that the government is well, the people may not understand that. It's also self-perception, self-preservation, right? I'm going to look out for what's in it for me. So when I see somebody else doing a great job, which I think I could do it, then that disparity comes in people's minds. So this is where I say, we need to start thinking about creating more jobs, because the moment there's enough jobs in the market, then the pressure people are feeling right now towards government to, hey, I don't have the right job, that will reduce. Now, the big question is, how do you create good jobs in a market where the transportation industry is taking a hit, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry taking a hit right now, and the government is trying to accommodate all those jobs in the local market there. This is where, if we are able to support the SMEs of the Singapore to support and solve problems for the Asia Pacific region, that will be the most critical element there. So because if they have more work from outside of Singapore in solving their problems, even if it means setting up offices in other countries, that will create more revenue growth for those countries to expand and create more jobs, both locally and internationally as well. So for me, that will be the important criteria, is how do we create better jobs, good jobs? And when I say good job, it's not a PhD working in a bachelor's degree's job profile. Good job is when people are well employed. And that's going to be the important drivers, measuring what well employment looks like in the country. And then, of course, well-being, people have talked about this well-being factor as well, that mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being are key drivers, especially when inflation is going up. So we need to measure, have a countrywide measurement of well-being, which again, we at Gallup already, we have it, but also at a local government level, capturing data to then showcase to the local population so that they can dispel perceptions with facts. I think it's more of a perception issue than a fact issue, to be honest with you. And finally, I say, what has helped economies globally grow? Now, when you think about the US, Japan, Germany, all these countries back in the 1980s, when they asked the economists, which country will be the forefront of the GDP race by the year 2000, people said it's going to be Germany, Japan. What actually got the United States to become number one? They grew to almost $10 trillion in the economy at that point in time. What made them grow at that level was brain gain. They had smart people like Steve Jobs' father, who actually came to the country from a different country, brought in smart people into the country, and they created great companies. So actually, it was only 1,000 people who set up great organization entrepreneurship, who essentially created that extra push of that $7 trillion push in the economy of the country by brain gain. Now, unfortunately, brain gain has stalled because of all that's happening globally right now. So what we need to shift to is more brain train. That's where the starts shifting happening there. If we follow the cycle, then that creates quality GDP growth for a country. That's a macroeconomics part that we sort of consult governments on. How do we create that? But right now, the big challenge we need to focus on is the middle section, which is creating good jobs. George.
Thank you. Saurav, I think you raised a lot of very interesting points. You have to understand that Singapore is not a large country like the US. It's a small country, and the middle class has grown since the 50s. And the middle class that has grown and had jobs and have done well in terms of standard of living have brought up children whose expectations are much higher than what their parents' expectations were in terms of bread and butter issues. I'm speaking as a Singaporean because I was born and brought up here, so I've seen all the changes take place in my lifetime. I think one of the problems that we are facing today is the job expectations of the people. The first question is, are our educational institutions turning out the kind of graduates that are required for the current level of jobs? Because we had been doing well so far, but this whole COVID situation and the digitalization process has changed the scenario for the way in which the world works and the way in which now we are not just geared to our own country, but to the whole world. So I think this is where the changes have to be adapted adequately. So the government is trying to tweak all the various systems involved to see how this can be done. But don't forget, time is required to make these changes. The second thing is, don't forget all these young people who who have potentials for jobs, but are choosy about the jobs that they do, have their parents' homes to live in and food given by their parents and, you know, everything looked after. So they don't feel an immediate need to go out and look for a job. This is what we hear from people who are potential employers, because they're very picky and choosy about the kind of jobs that they want. So it requires a mind change. And I think this is something that we have to try and figure out how this can be done. So I hear you. I know what you're talking about, but this is not a small problem. It's quite a big problem. And so normally when, as you said earlier, when there are perceptions that somebody else has taken away my job, I think the question to ask is whether you are qualified for the job or not. And if you're not, then what are you doing about becoming qualified for the job? So I think this whole process is now going on. But thank you. It's an interesting dialogue, and we hope that you will continue to work with the chamber. Incidentally, are you a member of the chamber?
I'm not sure if I'm a member of the chamber on this one right now.
But you can become an individual member even if you are working for a foreign company. So we look forward to people like you and having input from this, because most of the people who are here are all members from my understanding. So I just asked this question generally because it's the first time I'm seeing you.
Yes,
that's the reason why I asked. Yeah, but thank you. You brought some very valid points to the platform.
Thank you.
So I think we've had a very good round of discussions. It's almost 5:30. I'd like to go back to Manu. You've had a lot of input now, so maybe from your experience, you'd be able to summarize some of the key points that have been made and see how we can try and put some meat together for onward transmission to the government as they prepare for next year's budget.
This is for later, right? Not for now, right? To summarize?
Yeah. Yeah, but would you like to wrap up with something that, based on the discussions that we've had?
Happy to do so. I guess just two sort of buckets of ideas that came out. One is related to the not so much specifically to the budget, but to different government policies such as the COVID era restrictions on travel and so on, labor shortages, which I think are actually pain points for our business members, and we clearly do need to raise those issues. Then there's a second bucket of suggestions that can actually go as specific measures in the budget, things like what we can do to promote the green agenda, tax incentives, and so on, to encourage solar panel rollouts, that kind of thing. Secondly, similar incentives to help the SMEs and so on. So I think there are two buckets, and I think we can try and categorize these measures accordingly. And I think clearly a lot of our business members have concerns about the way the pandemic management has affected their businesses. And maybe there are some lessons to be learned there for all of us, including our policymakers, on how to craft healthcare measures if we have another pandemic. I mean, clearly at some point in time, we'll have another healthcare problem, and maybe we can learn these lessons and pass them on to the government. Let me stop there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to thank all those of you who have taken part in today's discussions. I see many names here. I think you may have been listening, and if you have any input that you want to give but didn't have a chance to do so today, you can write into us and give us your comments, and we'll certainly incorporate those in the final round of suggestions that we put up. So on behalf of the chamber, thank you, Manu, for coming to help us chair the session, and also to all the participants for the valuable inputs. And we look forward to working with you, and please keep in touch with us. And if you have ideas, you can write to us, and we'll be happy to take it up with you offline whenever the need arises. Thank you again.
Thank you.